Alright, I think we're back online. We're having all sorts of problems here in Eugene with the internet, so hopefully it stays connected. I guess they're having a bunch of outages around here. So we're going to let people jump back on. We're going to try it one more time. And if we get kicked off again for an extended period, we'll probably just reschedule and make sure they have the internet working. So we're going to give it a few minutes and see if everything stays connected. We'll do this again. We got Mike Kelly here, Mike Kelly's Guide Service, if you guys weren't here the first time we logged on. And we're going to hopefully be talking bobber dogging, float fishing, beads, all the cool tricks that he knows. And we're going to give away some yarn, beads. We got Stonies and Dave's Tangle Free. These are kind of the two main bobber dogging weights, and we got some of the new floats here, all sorts of cool stuff. So we'll give a few minutes here, and if we stay online, hopefully it does, we'll be giving away some of this. So if you like and share the video, if you got any friends that want to learn more about bobber dogging, haven't done it before, or just want to maybe learn something new, let them know, and we'll get started here pretty soon. You guys seeing the video?
Yeah, it's streaming good.
With the internet, so cool. I'm seeing people. So far, so good. We'll give it a few more minutes, and so that way we don't have Mike talking and not have any video going. Although we gotta learn more. So go ahead and say where you're coming from. You can say what's up. Mike said he got a winter steelhead yesterday. You guys got one?
Yep. Yes, we got one yesterday.
So
first one of the year.
So they're here. Sure feels like winter steelhead outside, although there's still some good Chinook fishing to do. We're gonna jump in here this month, then early next month we're gonna do possibly side drifting, and then we'll probably do some hardware stuff, and then also some more beads, and we might do a light line float fishing presentation if it gets low and clear, because that's what Daniel and I like to do. So, you guys still on? Okay. All right, go for it.
All right. So where I was at before we were so rudely interrupted, we're going to talk about bobber dog setup. So I'm going to go over my line, my tackle, and what I use to get all dialed in the morning or the night before I go fishing. So I'm using this new 40-pound Power Pro Super Slick braided. This stuff is killer. It's a little bit thicker than your, the 30, not quite as thick as the 50. I feel like it's kind of the perfect diameter. It kind of floats on the water nice. Doesn't tip wrap on the tip of your rod quite as much. And it's obviously plenty strong. And the new blue Super Slick is really supple and nice to fish with. It's not as rigid. It's just a nice line to fish with. From the Super Slick, I put on about 10 to 12 feet of bumper. I'm using 17-pound clear blue Stren. This is kind of a worn out label, but you obviously see it's in my tackle box. I use it. So I put on about 10 to 12 feet of that that I tie to the Super Slick with an improved Albright knot. The main reason I use that is it gives the little bit of stretch, so when you're fighting the fish, it's not quite as jerky with the braided line. And the second reason I like to use it is the bobber slides real quickly up to the bobber stop. We use these, I'll get into the weights in a little bit, but if you're not using a real heavy lead, sometimes the bobber doesn't slide down to the stop quite as quickly on braided line. So I find that on the monofilament, it seems to go to the stop right away, so you're fishing really quick. And then we were chopping our West Coast floats to get our little chop bobbers. And now Aerofloat, Hawken, has come up with these new chubby, they're just kind of a one size chop bobber. These things are pretty cool. I haven't really fished them too much. We tried them up in the Olympic Peninsula a couple days last March, and we really liked them.
What's the reason behind the chop?
Well, I like the chop bobber because with bobber dogging, we're kind of we'll go into the technique a little bit, but you're basically with the bobber dogging, you're gonna fish about the depth and then that again a half. So if you're fishing 10 feet of water, I'm gonna fish about 7 feet deep.
To your lead.
To my lead. So you're kind of dragging essentially this presentation through the zone, and the flat bottom of the bobber lays down on the current. So we're a normal float, you're going to want to fish up and down like this, like a normal jig fishing or bead fishing, or with the chop bobber we're going like this downriver. So the current is pushing up against the flat part of your gear, and it's pushing everything downriver because you're kind of dragging it all. So it seems like you tend to get hung up a little bit more with just a normal float. And if you're getting hung up too much, you're fishing too deep. But these new chop bobbers are cool. You don't have to cut the West Coast floats. They hold up a little bit quicker, and all the salmon fishermen won't get mad at you for buying up all the salmon floats for steelhead fishing.
We use the regular, the new stem AF5 floats a lot. And
and those are
awesome.
Also really, really nice floats. And then I go from, I just put a normal bobber stop on. And then if you'll notice underneath my chubby, I've got a real heavy bobber stop. I don't know if Daniel can see that.
Is this one of the rubber one? Oh, no,
that's the rubber bead above.
Okay, yeah.
So I put the rubber bead above my chop bobber. That's just for when my guys reel in, they don't break out my eyelets. These nice soft rubber beads made by Poochie or Killer, eyelet savers. And then below the bobber, a couple inches above my swivel, I put a heavy braided, I use like 72-pound sturgeon leader. And I tie that, it's just real thick so it, the bobber doesn't slide over it. And the main reason why I do that is if you break off, a lot of times you'll actually save your bobber. So you'll hang up on your lead, break that off, and then the bobber will stay there, so you're not, you don't have to retie quite as much, and you're not chasing your $4 bobber down the river. And then I go to a rolling drop swivel, which is also made by Poochie. These are Killer. They kind of come off the center as opposed to being attached to the top or the bottom eyelet. So I feel like you get a little bit less tangle. But yeah, just kind of a fancy side drift and bobber Doggin swivel. I really like these, made by Poochie. Then I go from there. I tie anywhere from 2 to 3 or 4 feet of a Yarny leader. I'm using 12-pound CXX P-line. And then from there I have a bead dropper off my Yarny that I just tie onto the shank, and I'll go over that knot here in just a second because I got a kind of a cool knot for that. And then running off that Yarny, we're running a what I got is which color is this? This is the orange.
This looks like Chinook orange.
Chinook orange. These are the new soft beads by Steelhead Stalkers. These are awesome, real non-snaggy, floaty, very fishy. And I'll go over the rig ups in a second, but I have, if you see, as I pull this bead back, I've got it set on a bead rig, so there's like a small bead tied into the leader, and the soft bead just slides right over that red bead, and it kind of holds it there. Believe it or not, it'll slide down a little bit here and there, but for the most part, it's actually pretty stable. If it starts to get loose, you can just pull it off and just run the bead through a different part of the bead, and you can actually get some days I'll have one bead will fish all day, which is crazy for.
Yeah, they don't slide too much. They're pretty tough. We use a little bit tougher plastic on those, because it's still soft, but you don't want to be replacing it all the time. So yeah, that's kind of a big thing. And
my favorite part about all these is with that red bead rig up, if you look in the middle, it kind of gives it that blood dot eye. So, it is about as realistic as it gets. It's a transparent red dot eye. It's just killer. And some days, that is just the cutting edge of
Yeah, and these
The fish really like
we
'em.
we actually figured out how to get the plastic to be neutrally buoyant. So you put them in the water and they'll slowly sink, kind of like a regular egg would, or a hard bead, which is kind of hard to duplicate. And that's why hard beads are pretty effective. They drift naturally. So that's another little thing of the little plug there. But
Yeah, and we're doing 2 to 3 inches of a peg. Some guys like less, some guys like more. It's all personal preference. But definitely getting the bead away from the hook is crucial because I just think it gives you a little bit more of a natural drift. The hook doesn't want to drag it down quite so fast.
if you guys got any questions, you can go ahead and just jump in. I'll chime in and ask Mike if you have any questions.
One question on there. Edwards. What do you use to determine what leader length you're going to run?
Leader length. Well, for the beads, I'm pretty much always 18 to 24 inches off my droppers. For my Yarny, I mean, it kind of depends on water conditions. If the water's really high, I tend to shorten my leaders a little bit. When the water's a little lower and clearer, I kind of lengthen them up a little bit. And again, it's kind of just preference. I wouldn't say that there's one length that is like the key to doing it, but some people like a little longer leaders, some people don't. If you got the bead dropper, if you're not going to run a bead dropper and just a Yarny, then you can get away with a little longer leader or whatever. But I don't think that that's as much of the concern. Just whatever you got. 3 to 4 feet's a good general rule and kind of gets it away from the gear.
Cool. Go ahead.
And then we'll kind of go into and then the technique of bobber dogging. Basically, like I said, we're going to go the depth of the water plus half that depth again, roughly, give or take. So like I said, in 5 feet of water, I'm normally setting my bobbers around 7 to 8 feet to the weight. And then, you're just casting out. Normally, I cast about straight out across from the boat. If anything, just slightly upstream. You don't want to go, see a lot of guys going way upstream to where you're like, everybody's quartered back. You really just need to go straight across to just slightly upstream and then just allow the weights to sink down and, just fish them like you would anything else, through the water. A little bit different than normal float fishing, like with jigs and beads. I'm going to always tell my guys to keep their line off their water. They're going to mend and they're going to keep as much line as possible off their float. With bobber dogging, I like to lay 2 to 3 feet on the water because that's again part of the whole process of dragging the baits and keeping kind of everything moving along through the water, especially in slower, the long flats where the bobber dogging really works really good.
So you don't worry if it comes up shallow, you just let it ride.
Yeah, you let it ride. Now, I mean, if you're set at 7 feet and you come into 2 feet of water, you're going to really be dragging hard and it's going to start altering your presentation. So, it's not the kind of technique where you can just set it at a depth and fish the same depth all day. I mean, it'll work, but you will watch your success improve if you really micromanage your depths and coming through you've got a 7-foot hole and so you're going to fish it accordingly, but then at the end of it, as it starts to shallow out, it's not a bad idea if you're going to go to a long section of shallower water to shallow that out. And so you're not really the point is to just kind of drag it, not like really you don't want to see your bobber jerking around.
I think the nice thing, we do a lot of float fishing with small jigs, and the presentation's so much more not important, but as far as having your stuff just off the bottom and you have to know the water really well, and bobber dogging you can kind of learn as you go a little bit, I think, as far as your depth, but like you said, being able to fine tune it when you do know the depth, so that you're dragging but not too much. I think that's why it works so well. You're always on the bottom, you're always right in front of the fish.
Yeah. And for the most part, this accounts for, I would say, 70% of my fishing on the coast. It's just really easy to fish multiple guys in a boat. You're not going to snag up a lot. And the results obviously speak for themselves. So,
yeah.
I don't know if there's any more questions on there for the...
You guys can, if you got any more questions, just keep them coming. We'll try to chime in and ask kind of as we're going. We'll also take questions at the end too. So.
And I've got this rigged up with a yarn ball, but another thing that it works really good, because I mean everybody's out there fishing yarnies and beads. I mean that's pretty much nowadays every boat you see has got that same thing. So on real high pressure days like on Saturdays and Sundays, what I like to do is I really like to rig up the Steelhead Stalker micro worms, and I'll use a size, I believe I use a 1 or a 1/0 hook, and I'll thread those on, and I'll bobber dog those micro worms, especially in the lower clear water and high pressure. They have a lot of action, and they're totally different than the yarn ball. It's just something different that you don't see a lot of people fishing. So a lot of days, on the high pressure days, I'll fish just a little bit different. Pink worm, even the red ones were doing really good.
The smaller ones. Do you run it just by itself?
Yep, and or with a bead dropper, you can also run a bead dropper off those as well. But by themselves, they're really effective. They're so small and skinny that water hits them, and there's just so much action on them.
Yeah.
So I kind of wacky rig them. I don't have one rigged up here, and then the other thing I've been doing, instead of a yarny, and this is another killer way to fish when it's really high pressured, is we just kind of make up these homemade spinners on fishing line. You can use the hard fish pills, and then I put a bobber stop above all the tackle with a little clevis, and then just a little Colorado blade. Nothing too fancy. I mean, it's like anybody can make these at home with just a couple of parts, and you just tie that onto your terminal tackle and bobber dog that just the same as you would a yarn ball, and this will catch fish. I mean, works really good. It's like
I've seen those before.
It's like a mixture of spinner fishing and side drifting or bobber fish. It's just really killer. It's not always the ticket, but some days, like I said, on high pressure days when every fish is seeing a yarn ball, a little bit of hardware coming through there, dragging through there can work really good. And this works really good in the choppy water. So, coming through boulders and stuff like that, and that flash coming through there, get fish to move, and big fish tend to hit this as well. So
that's pretty cool.
No, not too many of you guys should do this though, because then it won't be quite as effective for me. But
this is one of the they're just little 3-inch. They're trout worms, and we tell people about them quite a bit. We probably shouldn't, but some winters these will catch like 70% of our fish. They're just
those are awesome.
Really
great
good
Steelhead worms, and not even just in the low clear water. They work in like your typical green water. They're big enough.
Yeah. Well, you figure beads aren't. A lot of stuff for worms they're small, but for a lot of the tackle people use yarnies or it's a lot bigger profile. So yeah, they work. So that's the whole bobber dogging rig. Somebody else asked how far do you run your bobber stop, and that's just basically your depth. You want to run half.
You want to run your depth plus half the depth. So
okay.
And like I said,
so 10 feet you want 15 feet.
Yeah, 10 feet you're going to be wanting around 15 feet, and 5 feet I go like 7 to 8 feet. There's no set exact. If you're some of it also has to do with your current speed, and the faster the current, you can drag it a little bit harder. In the slower flats, a foot of difference is going to make a big difference because that water current's not pushing as fast. So if you're a little bit too deep, it's going to really want to drag. Where, the whole point is you want these weights to kind of just hit the top of the big rocks. You're not trying to dredge it through the zone. You're just trying to get it down to where it's like in the strike zone. And Steelhead, all they need to do is see it. They don't need it put right in front of their face. So
Alan's asking how big of a downstream belly do you allow to form, or do you keep it tight?
I like 2 to 3 feet. So I don't want a ton of line, to where the fish pulls that bobber down and then you got to crank up all this line that's catching water. I also don't want the line going right to the bobber, so you're almost basically feeling the bite.
Yeah.
So just enough, 2 to 3 feet. So a little bit of water catches it, and then you can still pick up and set the hook and get a good hook set real quick.
And that's probably the key to have running braid as your main line too, so you can be on the fish.
Right, and
get the hook in.
Exactly.
Shane's asking best way to run your boat when you're setting up. Can you run the boat with fish at the same time?
Well, Is he talking about fishing on a motor? So like fishing on the motor, which I do a lot. You know, I fish my motor in my left hand, rod in my right hand. So, you know, if I'm facing downriver and we're fishing downriver right, so I'm going to have my motor downriver. So I'm facing it and, you know, fishing. If I'm fishing downriver left, then I'm going to fish bow downriver. My clients will be fishing first and the motor's upriver. Generally, I try to keep my boat parallel with the bank. Start my drift and we kind of cast out. It all just depends on the water conditions and
Is that similar to how you would approach side drifting?
It's basically the exact same as you would side drifting.
Okay.
Other than, you know, you're probably going to cast, you know, a little bit further upriver with bobber dogging.
And you can probably cast sooner too to get up in those tight spots where the fish are.
You can definitely cast
sitting
sooner.
up in that fast
Right.
water. Cool. We'll go ahead and.
So
if you guys have any more questions about the bobber dogging part, you can ask. Mike's going to talk about a couple different types of techniques here. And also, if you're just joining, like and share the video. We got a bunch of tackle we're going to give away to people who like and share the video. And we're just like we did the last couple weeks. So let your friends know if they're interested in this kind of fishing.
Question about rod and reel.
Rod and reel? I didn't see it. Go for it. What is it?
What size rod and reel are you using?
I'm using, well, I was going to go over rods and reels in a little bit because they're all the same for my floats, but since you asked, let's go over them. I'm using the SH964 made by Rogue. That's 9.5 foot 6 to 12. It's kind of a very versatile bobber rod. This is basically what I use for all my floats. It's, you know, long enough that you can mend and keep line off the water, but it's also not too long to where you're sword fighting in the boat. And the 10.5 footers can be a little bit of a pain in the butt in the boat anyways. And then you'll notice too, these Rogue rods have the new CFX handles made by CFX.
That's right, yeah.
The Steelhead Stalkers. These are awesome. They're a little lighter than the cork. They clean up really good. And the most important part is they look really cool.
That's right. You gotta look good on the river.
And then all my rods are outfitted with the Daiwa Ballistic 2500s, which are my new favorite steelhead reel. They're really light, durable, and I mean they're a little expensive, but I feel like they're way worth it for the quality that you get, the performance you get out of them.
2500, you said?
Yeah, the 2500. The 3000 work okay for the Chinook, but I think they're a little bit big for steelhead. I don't know, that you don't need that much line, and it's kind of nice to keep everything nice and light. This setup right here is very light. You know, it almost blow you away how light it is. And like I said, I use the same rod and reel for all my float setups.
6 to 10.
6 to 12.
Or 6 to 12.
Yep. 9.5 foot 6 to 12.
So if you hook a big fish on the umpqua or big
You got them
native,
dialed. Yep. And they're all made down in White City at Rogue. They're all everything's American-made components. All the blanks are rolled on site down there. The folks are great folks down there. Small company, real friendly, great customer service. We really like them a lot.
So in general for bobber dogging, you're going to want like a 6 to 12, 8 to 12 in that range, just a little bit stiffer rod than maybe you'd use for...
Yeah, my side drifting rods are definitely a lot lighter, more noodly. With the bobber dogging rods, I definitely want to, because you know you've got loose line out. It's like side drifting, you're directly connected. You're feeling that bite direct. With the bobber fishing, you're seeing the bite, then gathering up your line and setting the hook. So I like a little bit stiffer rod so I can get a real positive hook set as you're kind of like in that limbo. Where steelhead fishing, you know, you've already have that rod loaded up quite a bit by the time it bites. So you're not losing all that, you know, from the fish grabbing that rod. You're not feeling that big bend on it. With the bobber rods, I like a little bit stiffer of a rod. But these are killer float rods, and a lot of guys are starting to switch over to these now on the coast. So check them out.
Cool. That's right.
So the second technique I'll go over is just bead fishing. So it's quite a bit different than bobber dogging, where we're kind of dragging our gear. I'm just going to fish a single bead under a float. I've got a 1/4 ounce arrow float again with a 1/4 ounce weight underneath it in line. And then I run I personally like about a 6 to a 7 foot leader. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm going to justify it here in just a second.
You wrap that up in the bottom of the boat before you cast it?
I wrap it up in the bottom of the boat before I cast it. Now, the main reason why I like the longer leader, when I'm on smaller systems, creeks, or like some of the smaller rivers that I'll fish from time to time, I shorten my leader quite a bit. But on the main coastal rivers, Siuslaw, Umpqua, Siletz, Wilson, Trask, all that, I go with the longer leader. And the whole technique, at least for me, behind it, is, I don't have it rigged up here, but normally we have a split shot or 2 split shots about mid-depth of the line. So the way I see it is most of the water you're fishing for winter steelhead on the coast is, 7 feet and under for the most part. So I'm adjusting my split shot throughout the day accordingly. So I'm actually using my split shot as like my slinky, if that makes sense. So most of the time my bobber is just pegged to my weight. And say I'm in 3 feet of water, I'm going to drop my split shot down about 3.5 feet. So it's going to sink down to the water, and the bead's going to ride along the top of the gravel. Mm-hmm. Now, again, we're not trying to drag it at all. We're just trying to use the split shot as a method to get the bead into the zone.
So your main weight there will get it down pretty quick, and then your split shot will get it the rest of the way.
Well, right, but I mean, for the most part, I'm not even setting the bobber, right?
See.
I'm using that split shot. This technique I use mainly in low, clear water. So, I mean, you're not really needing to get down really, really fast. It's more just a slow get into the zone and drift those beads, especially through the flats and stuff. So, that's the reason for the long leader. Now, that being said, if you're just like the anti-long leader guy, which I know some people are and they hate it, you can totally shorten it down to a 4 foot leader, and now you're just going to have to adjust your bobber more often accordingly to the water depth, which is fine. It doesn't really matter. It's just whatever you want to do.
A split shot probably gives it a little more of a natural egg.
I feel like the split shot gives it more of a natural egg. You get the long leader, it all kind of gets down, and that egg really just floats down and just kind of rides the top of the gravel. I mean, when the water's low and clear, this technique just kills it. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really deadly. With this one, I'll fish the hard beads along with the soft beads. Lured and Steelhead Stalkers, those are my go-to beads. So this is
probably a similar setup that if you were using one of those new arrow weighted floats would kind of be a similar deal.
Yes.
It's got a 1/4 ounce.
Right. The new Bead Masters.
Yeah.
Right. And I haven't even, those kind of came out just as the last winter was ending, so I haven't actually used those yet. But those, supposedly, my buddies are saying that those are awesome floats as well.
Yeah, I've seen guys fish like this. I haven't really seen it, so that's pretty cool.
But you can use, again, this is just what I'm using for floats and stuff like that. You can use any float. You can use a West Coast float. You can use a Bomac. It doesn't really matter. Just go ahead and grab whatever you got in your tackle box, and you can fine tune it for there. There's so the Bead Master.
1/4 ounce Bead Master, and so I don't know exactly if there's a 1/4 ounce weight in it. I think it might, or it holds a 1/4 ounce, but however it works, it does this kind of similar setup. You just have your lead built into the bottom. It also helps it ride up and down nicely, and then you can run your split shot down the leader.
Yeah, those are killer.
I think now's a good time. Mike, why don't you come in and introduce yourself? We're going to bring in Mike. We always are saying Mike. Mike Glass.
This is the guy you get your tackle from.
Yeah, this is the guy owns the shop here.
Howdy.
So when you guys win prizes and stuff, Mike's the man that gets it sent out to you, and he's hosting here. So why don't you just tell him a little bit about the shop, how long you've been doing this, and
well, obviously
what you
I'm
focus
Mike.
on.
Some guys may recognize me, some may not with all this stuff on my face, but I've been doing this. I've had Oregon rod reel and tackle for about 7.5 years now. I mean, we primarily focus on salmon, steelhead, trout. We do a little bit of the saltwater or whatnot, and focus on bass and whatnot. So we primarily just try to focus on what everybody else doesn't. You know, we definitely consider ourselves a pro shop, but we see all different types of walks of life in here. You know, we pride ourselves in making sure people really feel comfortable when they come into a shop, and that's really important. You see a lot of different shops in the area, and they're all great for their own reasons, but you know, we really want to help people out. We really generally want to make sure people get out there and they can have time to focus on, you know, just fishing, and not whether they're doing the right thing or they're set up right or, you know, whatnot. The whole point of this is just to have fun, and that's what we're here about. You know, we're here to set you up. It's not very uncommon for me or Gary or one of the guys in the shop to have you guys come in, set you up just like the way these guys are set up right now, to make sure that you guys feel confident when you get out there on the river, you know. So we're here to help you guys out. We, you know, encourage you guys to sign on to this, because this is great stuff. You know, this is firsthand stuff, and you know, the stuff that you guys see here on the table, we carry day in and day out, and we preach it, we love it, and we fish it. So definitely encourage you guys to come in and check us out. We soon will have our online store up and going, so be looking out for that. It's actually ready to go. We're just pretty much getting the inventory set, and that'll be going before the end of the year, if not by the first year at the latest, for sure. So
Cool.
If I may, there's a couple things that, you know, we've talked about here as far as products and stuff like that. You know, all these products here we carry here in the store, you know, the Stonies, the Daves, you know, the UV Steelhead Stalkers products, you know, all this stuff obviously we carry here in the store. I just want to talk a little bit more about, you know, we've talked about the bead fishing and whatnot, and maybe ask Mike and Chad a few questions. You know, the weights are key. I find that, you know, and I'm sure these guys will agree with me, the weights are a big key to your success, especially in the bobber dogging and side drifting, really. These are very innovative weights. These are things that have come out in the last couple of years that have really just been game changers straight up. You know, the Stony River sinkers, the people that don't know about them, these are actually made out of stone. So you guys that, you know, are green friendly, like most of us, want to take care of our systems, our rivers, you know, not polluted with a whole bunch of stuff that we don't want in our systems. These are green, but you know, they fish different than any other weight on the market. And then that being said, you know, the Dave's Tangle Free, they have their place too. I think Mike can touch base on that, kind of, you know, give us a little bit more insight on why he fishes one versus the other and the differences and what the benefits are. So maybe you can help us out with that a little bit.
Well, with the Stonies are pretty much my overall bobber dogging weight. They're just really good. They don't snag up a lot. They're made out of stone, like Mike said. It's kind of that rock on rock, you know. They kind of just bounce along, and they're not very dense, so they don't sink very fast, which some people will be like, oh no, I don't like that, but it's actually a good thing, because they're not, you know, they go into the water and they're not just immediately hitting the bottom and getting you snagged up. They kind of just get you down into the zone. Now, where the Daves shine is when the water is really high and you're turbulent, and it's kind of that day where you're almost the day before you should be fishing, but you want to be fishing, so you are fishing.
Yeah.
The Daves are great because they're very dense. They get down immediately, and they're not very. They're rubber coated. They're like, they don't snag. I mean, I bought, you know, a half dozen packs of these from Mike last year at the end of the season, and I still have a bunch of them left. So both products are very snag free. I would say overall I fish the Stony Rivers quite a bit more on average conditions, but the Daves definitely have a time and a place, and they're both good products. They're both made by guys, local fishermen, cool guys, you know, good people to support, just like the Steelhead Stalkers. So
Yeah, I noticed something we noticed fishing last year. We were fishing both, and Daniel was catching more fish, and we were trying to, you know, kind of figure it out, and he was running a Stony, and it was the certain water level that it was slowing his presentation down a little bit more, and he was catching more fish. I switched over, and we both were fishing it. I was just using regular lead, and I started catching more fish. And then when the water changes, sometimes you need something that, like Mike said, that gets down a little faster. And so the fish will tell you what they want. You don't always necessarily need something that slows down your presentation. One day that might be the ticket. So it's good to have both. A lot of times you're fishing maybe a little boilier water and you need to get down fast where one won't work quite as well as the other. But yeah, it's good to have both, but definitely, be looking to see what how that presentation's working, and if the other guy's catching more fish, definitely switch up. And
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for example, I mean, like your Daves, if you're hitting lower, skinnier water and you're kind of into that more pocket fishing, and you're finding those fish that are hiding in structure more than in that main channel. Those Daves, if you're fishing a foot here to 4 feet there, and your run's 10 feet long, your Dave's going to get down quicker and allow you to fish that stretch a lot more than just a stony where it takes a little bit slower for it to get down.
Yeah,
right?
for
So,
sure.
what about the hooks? And that's another thing that we have found over in the last couple years with these techniques, especially with Mike's help. The hooks are a big key to some of your success with making sure that you're not digging in the gravel. Let's talk a little bit about the hooks that we use and why we use them.
Well, with the as Mike knows, because I just ordered 1,000 of them. With the bead hooks, we're using the. I'm starting to use the Gamakatsu light wire, which is
They're awesome.
It's kind of crazy because if you look at them, they almost look like, man, I could just bend this thing out, and you can quite easily, and you will lose a few fish a year to them bending out. But I find because of the thin diameter, you get way better hook penetration. So most of the fish, when you bring them into the boat, I mean, that hook just looks like a staple in the side of the fish's mouth. So the thickness of the hook really is gone away.
Yeah.
So you're not really worried about it. I feel like with the bead fishing, especially with the hard bead fishing, you lose a lot of fish with the bead sliding down to the hook, or just not really getting that penetration. Sometimes the fish grab it kind of soft, and it hits a hard part on their face, and then you get a couple head shakes and the fish is gone. You're like, oh, that was a fish. That happens a lot, where as I started to go to that thinner wire hook, I've really connected with a lot more of my bites. I feel like I end up fighting and landing a lot more of the fish that I hook. I mean, they've been killer, and I know you guys are using them and liking them a lot.
We always use stuff, that is a little unconventional at first, light hooks. We were using a different brand. I can't remember what they were. Somebody else. What's that? Oh, the mosquitoes. But they would have a tendency to break, whereas these will bend more. And so, if you match your line and your rod with the hook size, you'll hardly ever have any issues, I don't think.
Yeah,
so
definitely
they're
check out
hooks.
the Gami light wires, or
And I think
they
they drift better. I think you get hung up less because it's just a little bit difference in weight of that hook. But with your bead, if you're using like the soft beads or something, or even the hard beads that are neutrally buoyant, that hook's not going to be weighing that rig down as much with the light wires.
Any little bit of weight that you can save is going to give you just that much more natural of a drift.
Yeah.
So we got a couple different packs of yarn up here. Obviously the Steelhead Stalkers yarn, great stuff. Color combinations during the winter and stuff like that. During certain colors, certain water conditions and stuff. Do you guys find that some stand out more than others, or where are you guys at with that during the winter colors? What are your primary winter colors that you guys go to every year?
Well, with the yarnies, I mean, I think with Steelhead, I think any pink, shrimp pink, orange, white. You're in a red. You're in that zone of like a good fishy color. That being said, we all have our preferences for, what color you would like to use in certain conditions. I tend to kind of, as the water is clear and low, I kind of a little bit less contrast. So I'll go with like one or two colors of a yarn ball. As the water starts to get a little bit higher, I start to go to like the clown egg, where I'll use like 6 different colors or 5 different colors. I'll literally pull one piece of each out of the variety pack and tie up a yarn ball. And it kind of looks crazy, but that contrast works really good. Those on the Umpqua, we kill them on the 6-color yarn ball. But that being said, I'd say overall my favorite yarn ball is either the cerise with white or the shrimp pink with white. And those, it's hard to go wrong with those two.
Bill was asking earlier, bait. You run the bait on the yarnies?
Yes. Now you can use bait. You can also not use bait. It doesn't really matter. I normally start out by putting eggs on there, and I don't get overly attached to always having a fresh bait, but just putting it on there a few times a day, a drift or whatever, you'll have that scent and egg and a little bit of skein on there is all you really need. You don't need to get carried away with, having a fresh, perfect looking egg bait, in my opinion. But it's more a little bit of scent, something for them when they grab onto it, maybe tastes a little bit more lifelike, and they hold onto it just for a little bit longer.
Well, I know some days, talking to guys that are fishing, and they'll, it was all bait today, and that can change even during the day from it's bait to it's only beads, or they only want yarn. Some days they just want yarn and not bait or not beads. It's weird, and I think it's probably a combination of things we don't even understand: water clarity, color, temperature, all that stuff. But it's always good to have a little bit of everything to be fishing through there.
Yeah, well, in a lot of days, if we catch the first 5 or 6 fish on yarn, I'll just start pulling the bead leaders off, and I'll just go to the yarn.
Yeah.
Because, if they're telling you, then just don't fight it. But with the,
you will eat that bead.
I'll probably stay with the eggs too a little bit more in the higher water, because I just feel like in the lower water you start putting too much stuff and it starts to sink. It goes back to like the heavy hook thing. If you put too much egg on your yarn ball, it's going to want to ride down lower in the water column, and I think you could get hung up a little bit more. So I would stress, if you do want to use eggs, use a nice small little 3-berry cluster. Doesn't have to be big. It's just a little bit of scent and contrast to the yarn.
Ben was asking earlier the size of split shot on your bead rig here. Does that change, or is there a certain size of split shot?
With the split shot, you can use the smallers. Man, I forgot my little packs for the actual sizes, but you can use those little small tiny ones and use a couple, or you can use a little bit bigger of a split shot and just use one. I tend to use just one because even the bigger one is still really small and just less to deal with. If it's really, really low and I'm fishing in really, shallow flats, sometimes I'll even take the split shot off.
Okay.
Especially with neutral buoyant beads. They're sinking. So if you're fishing a nice long run, those beads are going to get down. So you're not going to necessarily need that as much. But for the most part, I'm running, I think they're size 5.
Gary's
Gary's got them right here. So I'm using size 7 split shot Eagle Claw.
So just a single one like that.
That's my go-to. Some guys like these little smaller ones and the BB size and kind of run 2 or 3 of them, but size 7 is pretty much. I have a couple packs of these. They'll last me most of the season. And use your pliers, don't bite them.
Yeah.
All this stuff isn't like, most of this techniques from, what I've seen and experienced, and thanks to Mike's help and the fellas here, and, most of these techniques, they're pretty solid. You can get through and you get out there and you can feel confident that these are going to catch fish for you, but I guess my point is it's important that you guys spend the time to pre-tie this stuff. It's going to be more effective for you on the river, instead of trying to, tie these things up, because you're going to lose bead rigs, you're going to lose, a little bit of leader, not as much as you would as just like your drift fishing or the old school techniques. Again, those catch fish, they work, but these techniques are really set up to really kind of keep you fishing and keep you on the water more, which is key. Because if you're on the bank, and believe me, I was that guy, old school, picking apart my bait caster, undoing birds' nests when I was learning how to fish and drift fish. It was frustrating to watch people catch fish, and and you're up there picking a big, nasty bird's nest out of your reel, and you're not catching fish. These techniques are really designed to keep you in the water and keep you fishing more and catching more fish, and that's really what it's all about, guys. We had talked about these yarn. None of these techniques, you're going to make a commitment as far as getting into buying these products and stuff like that, but this variety pack is just a good move. There's a lot of good yarns out there. Glowbud makes a good yarn and whatnot, but, you know, the yarn itself, and I know Dan and Chad have talked about this several times. The reason why we like this yarn is it's a natural fiber. Again, we're talking about, you know, keeping stuff out of the river that's, you know, we don't want in there for future generations and what. This is a natural fiber, and it also pulses different in the water. It presents different. That's why we like the Steelhead Stalkers yarn. Don't get me wrong, the glow bug yarn catches fish all day long, but this stuff here, even the feel of it, you can feel the difference. You know, you look at this yarn and you pull it out of the pack, and then, you know, you can see how thick and supple that stuff is. That's the way it's going to present in the water. It's you can use a lot less to really make a yarn ball. You know, some of the other yarns on the market, they're like, you know, straw. I mean, really, I mean, they're just real kind of rough feeling and whatnot. And so, you know, products like these are game changers. These are going to make a difference. It's going to create less yield, so, you know, you don't have a lot of fall off and, you know, a big pile of yarn at your feet when you're tying yarnies watching, you know, Ghostbusters or whatever else, right? So, I mean, it's important that, you know, you look at this stuff and just look at what's out there on the market and make it your own, you know. So there's a lot of good products out there. Again, this isn't the stuff out there that's, you know, the holy grail, but I guarantee you it's going to make a difference and it's going to catch you more fish. So
For sure.
Brian's asking, do you use round split shot for the ones with wings on the tabs or round?
These ones, I like the ones with the little tabs on the end, just because you can readjust them. You know, I kind of cinch them down on my leader with my bead fishing. I use the 12-pound P-Line CXX, which is real abrasion resistant. So, I mean, a lot of times you can just slide the split shot up and down, but I wouldn't recommend doing that a lot. So, you know, I do take my pliers, and I like the little tabbed end, you know, the round with the tabbed end, because it's just easier to grab the pliers and pop it back open and adjust it.
yeah.
You'll use the same rod for this bead.
Yeah, I use the same rod for all my float fishing.
Okay.
Same rod.
Cool.
Do you use the same hooks for yarn balls as you do for beads?
No, with the yarn balls, I just go to the regular. I mean, I've experimented using the light wires, but the main reason why I didn't like the light wires is because I run my bead droppers right off the shank of my yarn ball hook, and I find when I hang up my bead and I'm yanking it back, it bends out my yarny hook if I'm using, you know, the light wire. So I found just using, you know, the regular octopus hooks or the owner or whatever, you know, suits your fancy is just fine.
You were going to go over that.
Yeah, that knot.
And yeah, this knot is really cool. So if you'll see on my bead leaders, so I'll pre-tie up a bunch of bead leaders. This is the rigs for the soft beads with the red bead in the middle. And then on the end of all my bead leaders, I don't know if Daniel can get in that close, but
yeah,
I've got what's called a Doggin loop on the end. So I'll pre-tie all these. You can go online and look up how to tie it. It's really easy not to tie. And this is so killer because we can break off a bead leader and I can just hand this over to my client. Let's just say this is a yarny hook here, and they can just put the Doggin loop right over the shank of the hook, cinch it down, and you're fishing. So on a wet, cold day when it's raining, you're not tying a knot. And again, that just goes back to like Mike was talking about preparation. You can do all that on your couch, and you know, at the end of the day, fishing these Doggin loops, you may, you know, get in a few extra drifts because you're not tying a knot. So I mean, at the end of the day, that might end up leading to another fish or two.
You do that again, just slower.
And the cool part about them too is you can pull on them and undo them, so you can take them back off. And if the bead is, you know, with the hard beads, the knot's small enough that you can normally pull, you know, still exchange beads. So if you want to change bead colors, you can go over it.
Show how that attaches, and let's just hold it up real slow.
So I just got the shank of my hook. I'll just put it out there, and here's the Doggin loop. And the Doggin loop just goes right over the shank, and you just cinch it. Voila.
Yeah, it's a super strong knot too. I don't think we've ever broken one at the Doggin.
You're not gonna. If you tie it right, you're not gonna break it.
Yeah. And you use a little bit lighter from your leader from here to there, or do you just run straight 12?
Yeah, I generally do 12-pound yarn balls, 10-pound bead leaders, or I'll go 10-pound yarn balls, 8-pound bead leaders. Kind of just depends. Unless it just gets really, really low and spooky, I don't feel like steelhead are too line shy, especially fresh steelhead. But if you are fishing a little bit higher up in the system around fish that have been sitting around a little bit longer, I would stress to go into lighter tackle. And
yeah, we use a lot of light line, and we use that same rig on a vertical float fishing presentation and have no problems with the hook or the rig, even with 6-pound, or when we get real crazy, use 4-pound for some of the rivers we fish. That
some days that's the key.
Yeah.
I mean, that'll be the difference.
Yeah, we've been a couple rivers around here in the summer where we've definitely seen fish move out of the way of your rig coming down the river, and changing the pound test. Will work. In the winter, it's probably not as big.
Yeah,
a deal,
I'm more talking lower coastal rivers. Yeah, but
So you had mentioned, the leader, and we've talked about this in other seminars, fluorocarbon versus mono and stuff like that. You had mentioned you're using the strand. Are you using this, mono as a leader also?
Yeah, I'm using the P-Line CXX. I don't know. I've gone back and forth between fluoro and mono, and I've seen instances where I feel like it works, and then I feel like a lot of times it doesn't matter. I don't know. I haven't been convinced enough to go full fluoro, so I just kind of go with the monofilament. I go through so much of it that it's a little cheaper and it's effective, but the nice thing about the fluorocarbon, and where I will go to fluorocarbon sometimes, is on the straight bead fishing where you're using the longer leader and your leader's rubbing in the rocks a little bit more because the abrasion resistance is a little bit better, I think.
Yeah.
So, in that instance for toughness, I think that might be a good move. And it sinks more than the monofilament. Yeah. So I've always not liked it for my yarn balls and stuff because I don't want that stuff to just sink right.
Yeah.
I've already using the weight. I figure I use enough weight to get that down. So, to answer your question, I use pretty much strictly monofilament on my leaders. And then I do, like Chad was asking too, I do step it down. So I'll do it, the 12 and 10 or 10 and 8.
And then your bumper, what was that?
The bumper's 17 pounds clear blue strand. I like the clear blue strand because it's kind of got that tint of blue to it, and it's kind of high vis. On the water, it kind of sticks out, has a little bit of a glow to it. So it doesn't stick out like normal high vis, but it's enough that you can kind of see it and doesn't blend in like Maxima Green or something like that.
There's also we use Blood Run Tackle makes a floating mono that's pretty awesome stuff. It's an East Coast company.
Yep.
And it works good because it's that bumper's nice to have on the surface, so your belly isn't getting pulled under as much. Yep. And that's another line you can try. They have different colors, and give it a shot. That's Blood Run Tackle. And I think they might actually have a new one that's like 20 pounds, so it's a little bit heavier.
Yeah,
a lot
and it's been popular back east.
Yeah.
With the float guys out there. So, well, I guess the last rig I'm going to go over this evening is the long forgotten jig fishing. With all the talk about bobber dogging and beads and all that, the last couple years, what used to be my favorite technique, and really still is when it comes down to it, is just the old bobber and jig. Again, we're using the same rod, same 40-pound braided. With the jig, you can or cannot use the bumper. I don't normally use the bumper because, you got a lot more weight and it just seems to go down a little bit quicker, so there's not as much of a need for that. But the jig fishing can be probably, in a lot of ways, a lot of the most deadly technique out there if fished properly. I really, really like it. You get your hook to land ratio is really high. It's great for fishing natives. You get a lot of hook sets in the beak, easy release, and it's just a great way to fish. So as you'll notice, On this, well, there is a bead on this too. So I'll run a bead dropper off my jig. I really like the soft beads for this because they're just really non-snaggy. So you're using really your jig more than anything to get down into the zone, and then your bead kind of just lingers around and is just there in the zone. And I'd say I get about 50-50 fish on jigs and beads. The jig's almost a bead in itself,
Yeah.
But probably the coolest trick I can show you about jig fishing, at least the one that I like the most, is my whole pet peeve is when you're always reeling in and your jig's like this, and you're just like, well, that's not the way it's supposed to look. So I kind of came up with this cool little technique. You just tie on a knot with your leader, cinch it down real good, and then cut it off and tie on a knot again in front of the old knot. What that'll do is every time you reel in, your jig doesn't do that. It doesn't go to that. So it just keeps your jig nice and level to the floor of the river. And I don't know if it matters, but it sure bugs the crap out of me when the jig's going up and down as opposed to straight.
Yeah.
So
The little thing.
yeah, it's the little things.
It's funny.
It always feels good.
Sometimes you see guys on the river fishing. Oh, what are you using? Oh, a jig, and reel it in, and it's a jig with like 12 sand shrimp hanging off the bottom.
Yeah.
It's going down the river like that. I was like, no, that's just a shrimp cocktail with a jig for the hook.
It's just the courier.
Yeah, right.
But the jigs are awesome. We went up to Olympic Peninsula last year with a couple buddies, and we were just fun fishing, bank fishing, and they had their old beads and worms and all that fancy stuff, and I was kind of behind them, and I ended up picking up quite a few fish behind them on just the old Nightmare jig.
Oh, yeah.
Low water killer,
Deadly.
And another thing with the jig fishing I'll stress too is when you're, especially for you bank fishing guys, and you get down into your money hole and you're all excited, don't just drop it down to 6 feet and try and drag the bottom with that jig on your first cast. I really, with jig fishing, I like to start from the top and work my way down. So if, like, say I come up to a 6-foot hole, I'm going to run my first pass at about 3 feet with my jig, because you'd be surprised how many fish will either rise up for that jig or maybe aren't even fully sucked down to the bottom. And then I'll work my way down to them. Just kind of the same as, like, if you come up to the hole, don't take the cast all the way out across the river. Maybe fish right in front of your feet, because a lot of times those fish are right there. So kind of work from you to the other side of the river with your tackle, and start from the top and work your way down.
Cover that spectrum, man.
And I mean, like I said, I've caught so many fish on jigs in front of me in mid-water column when my first natural reaction would have been like set it way deeper and cast over into that perfect green pocket.
Yeah, I think a
So-
lot of times those fish aren't being fished a lot of times too.
At
'cause
all.
everybody is going right to the
Right.
bottom. So you're like, that fish's like, finally somebody put something in front of me.
Yep.
And
Well, there's a lot of
they're
different
whacking.
jigs on the market, obviously. We obviously the jig master over here, the tire over here. Weights. There's a lot of different weights with the 16ths all the way up to quarters, and even in the bigger jigs like twitching jigs and stuff.
Yeah.
Where do you guys? Obviously the common size is going to be 1/8 and quarter. Where do you guys find the differences, and why do you feel you fish an 1/8 or a quarter more than the other? What are the benefits?
I like the 1/8 because it's it's not too big, but it's enough weight that it gets down quickly.
Yeah.
That being said, on your average steelhead conditions with a few 3, 4, 5 feet of visibility, I don't think a quarter or an 1/8 ounce jig. I mean, they'll hit either one. It's it's already smaller than a yarn ball. Now, when you're starting to get into the lower water conditions, I've seen jig size mean a great deal. I've had it where I couldn't even get bit on the 1/8, and my buddy put on a 16th ounce jig, threw it in there, and it's like cast after cast. So, the size does matter, especially in the lower and clearer conditions. That being said, it all is water condition dependent. And the higher the water's a little higher, or even in the low water, if you're fishing a fast, deep shoot, you may get away with using a heavier jig to get it in. 16ths don't work really good in choppy, boily, turbulent water, where they shine in like the flats or in nice calm pockets and stuff like that. And you can always, another trick I've used before too with the 16ths is add a split shot about midway up just to help get it down. Because my always biggest concern is that your jig's kind of doing this. With that 16th, there's not much there, so a little bit of weight sometimes won't hurt either, just to kind of get
Yeah,
it
I think
in the
there's
zone.
certain conditions. There's areas we fish on the coast where a lot of people fish larger jigs in the winter, and we fish a lot of just super tiny stuff that people kind of laugh at. But the presentation, you're coming into a rock, and a little bit larger jig's just going to hit that rock and get pulled under, whereas a lot of times we'll fish lighter jigs, and that float, the jig will allow that float to kind of just go around that, sweep around that rock, and a lot of times you'll get fish that'll grab them on the side of rocks or just behind them and stuff. So kind of depending on the water you're fishing, if it's boulder gardens and stuff, you might try a couple different sizes, because you will get a little bit different presentation on the way that swings through there for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely worth having the 3 sizes. I'd say 16th, 8th, and quarters are the ones to stick with, and this is probably my favorite way to bank fish. If I'm just going bank fishing, I just jig fish most of the time. I really like
Favorite jig for winters?
My favorite jig is the Nightmare. I also like my buddy Sam Werdinger ties dinger jigs, and he makes these killer jigs. He makes I like the black and white. I like black a lot, black and red, black and white, black and purple, blue. And then
we've done good on shrimp pinks.
Yeah,
shrimp
and then
pinks
you can't go wrong on the whole pink. Pink and white, cerise and white, and then Arrow Jig also has the Nightmare series. So they got like the kind of the Nightmare pattern with like orange, and a couple of the other, they do pinks and stuff like that are kind of cool. And I don't know, jig fishing's fun. You get to kind of pick out whatever colors you like the best, and don't be afraid to go to black, because black's deadly in all water.
I was just gonna
colors,
say, we pretty much just carry one jig.
Yeah.
It's just black,
but
purple's good too.
But I would also recommend try tying some of your own too. You can get raw jig heads, and I know Chad ties up a lot of his own. I get a lot of satisfaction out of catching one on your own jig. It's kind of like tying your own flies.
Yeah, for sure.
What about tipping your jigs? You guys ever tip your jigs with anything, as far as prawn or?
I like prawn. Like, you can just go right to the Safeway and just buy a bag of the old prawns. Nothing fancy. You can cut them up. Put a few in a plastic bag. Put them in your pocket. You can cut them up into small chunks and tip your jig. And some days it really works good. But that being said, too, I've also seen the untipped jig, just the jig, outfish the baited jig a lot of times, because it's more that subtle, it takes away from the action of the jig a little bit. So, it doesn't hurt to have prawn on there, but I fish naked jigs with full confidence.
Yeah, we mostly fish the little guys. You can add little things like little Berkeley, stuff, little gulp, different color contrast. We mess around with that sometimes, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't really help. But
I've even caught them with the micro worms
tipped. Threaded on,
so you can also tip the micro worms, and those can be really good too in the right conditions. But
it adds a lot of movement to the jig, and it doesn't really affect the feathers or anything. What line do you guys like better, P-line or Maxima? You were talking about Maxima, or no? You were. What's
I use
your braid, the blue braid.
The braided is Power Pro. With leader line and stuff, it all works good. I personally use the P-line CXX. There's the jig with the micro worm on it, and that will smoke them, especially in the choppy water. To get that action from the worm, you can kind of see how live those worm tails are. Yeah. But that's a cool way to fish a jig.
For sure. Yeah.
So
we use a lot of the STS Seagar fluorocarbon, but that's just we got confidence in it. We used it a few years ago on the Umpqua, and we had super light line. The water was clear, and we had hooked so many fish that we were like, well, let's see how strong this line is. And it's impressive for a fluorocarbon. We had 6 pound on there, and we're just
very
worse
strong.
than these big, wild fish. And so it's super strong for a fluorocarbon. you're going to get a little bit more stretch and perceived strength, I think, out of a mono. But yeah, you gotta kind of adjust your drag accordingly too.
Yeah, and that's why I do mono on the, on the bobber rigs too. Is just because you already have the braid, so there is no stretch in the braid. So it is nice to have a little bit, especially with not as experienced anglers.
Yeah.
A little bit of stretch and.
I mean, the Maxima, the P-line, the Seagars, I mean...
Yeah, it's hard to go wrong.
Yeah, they're all great lines.
All
They're
the
in
lines
business,
are good.
because they don't suck, I mean, they're great lines, I mean, the Strand, all that stuff, and even P-line, they make in the CX, they make a clear fluorescent that's real similar to this Strand. That's another great line. A lot of great lines on the market. It's just preference, really.
Yeah.
So
If you guys have any more questions for Mike, we'll just take some questions now and kind of going over all that we went over tonight. And if I missed any, you can, if you have any, Daniel, or see any that I missed.
Do you like to use the same color jigs as your yarn balls?
Yes and no. Like I said, I do like all the pinks, oranges, shrimp pinks, stuff like that. But my go-to jigs are the black and red and white. Nightmare pattern is probably my favorite jig. And I really like, the black and purples, black, purple, pink, black, blue, pink, all that. But
A little bit of contrast.
I like the darker colors with the contrast, and they just work really good. And then again, I can't stress preparation enough. I feel like, I'm a decent fisherman, but I'm better because I'm prepared. So I feel like, I put in a lot of time. You might see me on the water fishing or whatever, and I fish, an 8-hour day on the water, but, for every 8-hour day I spend on the water, I spend quite a bit of time at home preparing for that day. And we put in a lot of time in the summertime getting, everything, all the leaders tied up on rigs and getting all the tackle and organized and, get extra bobbers, extra weights, extra everything, and be prepared, because at the end of the day, just the Duncan loop alone, like I said, I mean, if that gets you a couple more drifts, that's a couple more drifts can be worth a lot in between a 40-hour work week.
Yeah, and a lot of times you rarely break off your yarn rig or the upper one, so you're just it's easy to throw
quick
those on.
and easy, and you're back on the water. And I'll see people catch a fish or break off, and they'll motor over to the side of the bank and they'll nose up, and they'll be up on the side of the bank for 10-15 minutes kind of re-rigging, and you could have got a lot of drifts in there. So
and a lot of times in the winter the bites are defined in certain times of the day or whatever it happens to be, and you need to be fishing for during that time,
right?
And that preparation's huge.
So spend more time on the couch tying gear and less time tying stuff on the boat.
Do you guys ever use lures for steelhead, and if so, what's your favorite lure?
Lures,
Hardware,
when I'm bank fishing, like for myself, the few times a year that I get to go fishing for myself, I will throw spinners a little bit, but not too much. But
What's
they
a
are
lure?
deadly effect. My favorite lure is a blue fox, number 4, baby.
The blue body.
Yeah, blue, purple, blue, green.
We found that we'll occasionally throw spinners before we leave holes and stuff, and sometimes it can buy you another fish.
Yeah,
We're not super hardcore into it because I figure that we'll get those fish on a more subtle presentation, but you never know. So
I think lures can be really effective too. Again, if you're putting in Moonshine Park, at 5.5 feet on a really busy Saturday, and there's 12-15 boats in front of you, 10 of them with your guides, and everybody's bobber dogging, side drifting. You got to figure that technique's been covered pretty good. So coming through on days like that, coming through behind those guys and throwing spinners or pulling plugs, I've seen that work really good. There's some days where you'll get down to the boat ramp and there's a couple old timers down there, and they got 5 in the box, and you just struggled to get 3 that day, and
Yeah.
you look over and all they got is 2, cop car hot shots in the front of their boat. And you're like, man.
Yeah.
So, there is the hardware thing has kind of definitely been shoved to the side, and
Yeah.
so it's definitely not something, if you have confidence in it, it's definitely something that's worth trying and, fishing. It definitely works.
Yeah, and just getting back to the basics, I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there this day and age, a lot of new techniques, we've talked about a lot of stuff, and just getting back to the basics, obviously, like we said, this isn't, the holy grail, but it'll definitely up your game for sure. There's a lot of great manufacturers out there, Blue Fox, R&B lures, First Strike lures, they all make good products, here, developed here in the Northwest and fished in the Northwest, I mean, again, just getting back to the basics, there's a lot of stuff here. I mean, this can be pretty intimidating to a lot of people, especially if, they're just getting out a couple times a winter or whatever. But, the subtle changes, just subtle differences, not reinventing the wheel, but just, upping your game a little bit and just giving you a little bit of competitive edge. That's what this is all about for sure. So.
Leslie is asking, how do you cure your eggs? Is there just if you're using eggs?
Well, with the egg cure, the steelhead, I kind of tend to keep it kind of simple. I don't go too crazy with salmon. I cure a bunch of different cures and scents and all that. With steelhead, I pretty much use Scott Ammerman's steelhead cure or the Baraxo-Fire. Those are like my 2 go-to cures. With the Baraxo-Fire, I'll add a little bit of sugar maybe to it, because my understanding they pulled a little bit of sugar out of the original recipe because of the shelf life. It was having issues with shelf life, so I'll add up a little bit of sugar just make a little sweeter bait, and we'll cure them up with that, and it's pretty simple. But I think with steelhead it's more of a visual thing. They're gonna see it and come and grab it. So I don't really get too paranoid about the cures and like this cure that, this cure that. But I think the Ammerman cure is very effective. He obviously knows what he's doing. I've had great luck with that. And the Baraxo-Fire, I mean, the Potsky guy's got it dialed in too. So those are kind of my two go-to cures for the steelhead. And I really like the Ammerman orange in the low clear water.
Yeah, so I was going to ask is, on the cures, pinks and oranges, or do you stick primarily to one, or
well, like the Ammerman's red and orange, so the red's kind of more the high water, the orange is really good in the low clear. And the Potsky's Baraxo-Fire, they make a ton of different ones, so I like the natural, I like them all really. So
Bill's asking, why don't fishermen use more night crawlers?
that's a
Years
good question.
ago, you could use a lot or catch a lot of fish on them.
Garden
You still
tackle.
can. We actually make a night crawler 3-inch micro worm that's used plenty.
Yeah.
So it's just easier than having to go get good night
Yeah.
crawlers.
Good worms are easy, but they are a little bit of a pain in the butt, like for quick rigging and stuff. But
Yeah.
they're deadly. More guys should fish them. That's a good idea, Bill. I'm going to try that this winter. Thanks for the tip.
Different Bill, presentation one thing, how do you know where and when to fish what river, and where on the rivers do you fish? That's something that I think you got to figure out over time. The thing we've been fortunate enough to do is go out with a lot of great guides, and you learn years worth of information in one day. So it's going out with Mike or any of the guys you see us fishing with, it cuts so much time off of your learning curve, and it's worth the $200 for the day. You learn a ton. That's kind of where we've got. If not, it'll take you time to figure out the correct river level.
Yep.
On each river is different. So we fish quite a few rivers, but I can't imagine trying to learn every river in Oregon. You'd never be able to do it in a lifetime. So keep track when you're fishing. If you have a good day of fishing, make sure you write down what the river level is and kind of what the clarity is.
Journal's crucial.
Journal it because and guys like Mike here at the shop, I mean, he'll tell people secrets. No, I'm kidding. He knows what the reports are, and so he can tell you what's working. if you're like, hey, I want to go to this river, he could say, it's a little high, or, to be out on the river. So, go to your local shop and definitely ask them. And a lot of times they'll be helpful. We're here in Eugene, which is kind of central in Oregon. So Mike kind of, has guides around here that fish from Portland to Southern Oregon. So it's kind of a good place. You can call in and harass him and kind of find out where to go.
And I use my journal a lot, tons, and all the time. You're like 3 years, remember that day 3 years ago when we really got them, and then so you'll remember certain details, but other details you miss, and you'll look back and you'll almost remember it one way, but it was written down another. And that's definitely got me going in the right direction quite a few times. And don't, network. If you fish the LC a lot, make friends with the guys that fish on the LC and exchange phone numbers with them and talk with them. Because there's a lot of guys that'd like to know how you did or what the water looked like when you were out there, just as bad as, you would like to know when they're out there. So, make some fishing buddies and on the rivers you fish, and, talk to the local tackle shops, keep a journal, and hiring a guide's never a bad idea either. If you got the money and the time to get out there with a guide, I mean, you can cut a lot of learning curve down just by picking their brains and seeing what we decide to do. And there's a ton of guides out there up and down the coast, and that'll fit each person's personalities and techniques and stuff like that. And even if you want to learn a certain technique, sometimes I'll have a guy that says, hey, I really want to learn how to bead fish, and so we can focus on that. We can teach you how to bead fish, or we can teach you how to jig fish, and just focus on that. If catching numbers isn't necessarily the number one priority, but you just want to learn a technique or learn a float, or there's certain floats where there's sketchy parts. Guide's a good way to go, is just to get you down the river safe and teach you the right way to get down the river, just that alone. So
cool. Well, if you guys have any more, we'll take maybe one more question. We're gonna wrap it up, and want to thank everybody for coming back and joining. I know we were out of there for 15-20 minutes probably, but looks like we were able to get it going for the rest of the time. Next month, we're going to do the same thing. We might talk side drifting. We're going to try to kind of focus on a little bit different technique each time, and different styles of similar techniques even, because, there's different ways to rig up for float fishing, jigs or beads. So, every month we're going to do this, and I think we're going to do 4. We're going to do at least 3 more before jumping into spring Chinook, but we got a long winter and hopefully a bunch of winter steelhead coming. So we'll pick some names for the people that liked and shared the video, and get you out some of this tackle. And if you guys...
About your contact info, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Mike Kelly's Guide Service. You can check me out, www.mikekellysguideservice.com is my website. Emails mikekellysguideservice@yahoo.com. I've got business cards down at the shop. If you guys are interested in getting out for winter steelhead, give me a call. I'm booking up fast, so I'm not going to have too many more open dates for too much longer. Heading down to the Elkin 6s in a couple weeks to finish off last bit of Chinook, and then I'll be pretty much switching over to full steam ahead for steelhead. So it was,
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll let everybody know when we're gonna have our next live video and what the topic will be in a couple weeks. So thanks again, everybody.